A billionaire rescued a homeless girl and took her to his luxurious apartment. When he returned from work, he was stunned by what he saw. The rain was pounding the streets of New York City that Friday night, turning the metropolis into a labyrinth of diffused lights and restless shadows. Richard Monroe, the titan of American advertising, watched the city through the windows of his armored Bentley, feeling strangely disconnected from the world he had helped shape with his multi-million-dollar campaigns. "Sir, we're almost there," announced the driver, his voice barely audible over the sound of the torrential rain. Richard nodded absent-mindedly, his eyes catching the reflection of his face in the fogged-up window. At 45, he was the epitome of success: perfectly trimmed grey hair, an impeccable Armani suit, and sharp eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything around him. But that night, something felt out of place. The car slowed down abruptly, making Richard lean forward. "Say, what happened, John?" "Sorry, sir, there's someone on the street, looks like a child." Richard frowned, leaning forward to get a better view through the windshield. There, in the middle of the storm, a small figure stood out against the darkness. A girl, no more than 10 years old, soaked and shivering, looked directly at the luxurious car. Something about the scene made Richard squirm uncomfortably. "Stop the car," he ordered, surprising himself. "Sir?" the driver questioned, hesitant. "I said stop." As soon as the vehicle stopped, Richard opened the door, immediately hit by the force of the rain. He walked towards the girl, who did not move, her large dark eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and something else. Defiance, perhaps. "Hello," Richard said, trying to sound kind, a skill he rarely needed to use. "Are you lost?" The girl did not respond, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Richard noticed the soaked rags she wore, her bare, dirty feet and the tangled hair plastered to her thin face. "What's your name?" he tried again. "Anna," came the reply, barely audible over the roar of the rain. Richard hesitated. His entire life was based on calculated decisions, carefully planned strategic moves. But something about this child, those eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world, made him act on pure instinct. "Anna, would you like to get out of this rain? I can take you to a safe, warm place." The girl did not respond immediately. Her eyes scanned the luxurious car, Richard's soaked suit finally returning to his face. For a moment, Richard had the strange sensation that it was he who was being evaluated. Finally, Anna gave a small nod. Richard gently guided her to the car, noticing how she flinched at his touch, as if expecting pain instead of comfort. When both were in the back seat, Richard instructed the driver to head to his apartment. The silence inside the car was palpable. Richard watched Anna from the corner of his eye, noting how she sat rigidly, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. There was something about her, an underlying tension that went beyond the natural fear of a street child. As the car moved through the stormy night, Richard found himself thinking about what he had just done. He, the man known for his coldness in business, for his ability to manipulate emotions through images and words, now found himself taking an unknown girl to his home. What motivated him? Compassion, guilt, or something deeper, an instinct he didn't know he possessed. As they approached his luxurious penthouse apartment, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of something momentous. That silent child beside him, with her eyes that seemed to hold dark secrets, was about to change his life in ways he could barely imagine. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, Richard looked at Anna and made a silent promise. He would discover the truth behind those haunted eyes, no matter the cost. Little did he know that the truth would be more shocking and disturbing than anything he could imagine, and that rainy night would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not only his compassion, but also his courage and determination. The elevator doors opened, revealing the opulent apartment. Anna took a hesitant step out, her wide eyes scanning the surroundings. Richard followed, feeling the weight of the responsibility he had just assumed. What would the coming days bring? What secrets did this small child hold? And how would this impulsive decision on a rainy night change the course of their lives forever? The luxury of Richard's apartment seemed to amplify Anna's displacement. The girl remained motionless in the middle of the living room, her soaked clothes forming a small puddle on the Italian marble floor. Her large, cautious eyes scanned the room, lingering on the expensive artwork, designer furniture, and the panoramic view of the night city through the huge windows. Richard, still wet from the rain, watched Anna with a mixture of concern and fascination. The contrast between the ragged child and the opulent apartment was almost surreal. "Anna," he said softly, trying not to scare her, "let's find some dry clothes for you." The girl stared at him, her face a mask of distrust. Richard realized that every word, every gesture of his would be scrutinized. He was used to navigating the treacherous waters of the corporate world, but this was completely new territory. At that moment, footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Mrs. Helen, Richard's housekeeper, appeared. Her eyes widened at the unusual scene. "Mr. Monroe, who is—" Richard made a calming gesture. "Mrs. Helen, this is Anna. She's going to stay with us for a while. Could you please find some dry clothes for her and prepare a guest room?" Mrs. Helen, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, quickly nodded, years of professional discretion overcoming her initial surprise. She approached Anna with a gentle smile. "Come, dear. Let's get you comfortable." Anna hesitated, looking at Richard as if seeking permission. He nodded encouragingly, and the girl followed Mrs. Helen, leaving a trail of water on the immaculate floor. Alone, Richard exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his impulsive decision. He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his hands slightly trembling. What was he doing? Taking in a street child without thinking about the legal implications or the consequences. His phone vibrated, reminding him of the meeting he had abandoned. 12 missed calls, 27 unread messages. The world outside continued to spin, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in his apartment. Richard was about to return some calls when Mrs. Helen reappeared, her face a mixture of concern and something else, horror. "Mr. Monroe," she whispered, "I think you need to see this." Intrigued and apprehensive, Richard followed her to the guest room. Anna was sitting on the edge of the king-size bed, looking tiny in one of Richard's robes, but that wasn't what caught his attention. On the floor, carefully arranged, were Anna's wet clothes, and next to them a small collection of objects, a rusty pocket knife, some coins, a piece of hard bread, and a drawing. Richard approached, feeling his heart race. The drawing, done in pencil on a piece of cardboard, depicted a scene that made his stomach churn. A family, but not a happy family. The figures were distorted, dark with aggressive lines and empty eyes, and in the center, a small figure that could only be Anna, surrounded by threatening shadows. "My God," he murmured, unable to look away from the disturbing drawing. Anna watched Richard intently, her eyes never leaving his face. It was as if she was waiting, testing, to see how he would react. "Mrs. Helen cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Monroe, there's an urgent call for you. Something about the campaign for the new client." Richard made a dismissive gesture, his mind racing with the implications of what he was seeing. "Cancel all my appointments for tonight and tomorrow," he said, his voice firm despite the inner turmoil. When Mrs. Helen left, Richard slowly knelt beside the bed, getting on eye level with Anna. The drawing between them seemed to vibrate with a dark energy. "Anna," he said softly, "do you want to tell me about this drawing?" The girl looked at the paper, then back at Richard. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, she reached out and grabbed the drawing, pressing it to her chest as if it were a shield. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Whatever was happening, it was clear that it went far beyond a simple street child. There was a story there, a painful and possibly dangerous story. As the night wore on outside, Richard knew he had crossed a point of no return. The mystery of Anna and her disturbing drawing was now his to unravel, no matter where it led him. Morning arrived with a blinding clarity, finding Richard sitting in his office, his eyes red from a sleepless night. His mind kept replaying the events of the previous night, the encounter with Anna, the disturbing drawing. He had barely touched the coffee that Mrs. Helen had brought him hours ago. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, straightening in his chair. Mrs. Helen entered, her face a mask of concern. "Mr. Monroe, the girl, she's gone." Richard stood abruptly. What do you mean, gone? I went to bring her breakfast and the room was empty. The clothes we lent her are still there, but she... The housekeeper hesitated. She's gone. A wave of panic and guilt washed over Richard. He should have foreseen this, should have taken precautions. Call security. We need to search the building. She can't have gone far. As Mrs. Helen hurried away, Richard ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. Where could Anna have gone? Why did she run away? And more importantly, how would he find her in a city the size of New York? It was then that his eyes fell on his desk. Something was different. His papers, always meticulously organized, were out of order, and in the center of the desk Richard froze. There, where it certainly hadn't been the night before, lay a new drawing. With trembling hands, he picked up the paper. The drawing was even more detailed and disturbing than the previous one. It showed what appeared to be the interior of a house, but distorted as seen through a nightmare. The walls seemed to curve menacingly, elongated shadows projected from dark corners. And in the center of the image, a small figure that could only be Anna, surrounded by larger, threatening silhouettes. But what really made Richard's blood run cold were the details. In one corner of the drawing, almost hidden, was what looked like an address. And scattered throughout the image, there were words scribbled almost frantically. Help, please, pain. Richard felt his heart race. This wasn't just a child's scared drawing, it was a cry for help. At that moment, Mrs. Helen returned, panting. Mr. Munro, there's no sign of her anywhere. What should we do? Call the police. Richard hesitated. The police would mean questions, investigations. It would mean handing Anna over to the system, the same system that had apparently already failed her before. No, he couldn't do that. Not yet. No, he said finally. We won't involve the police. Not yet. Mrs. Helen seemed surprised but didn't question it. Years of working for Richard had taught her to trust his judgment, no matter how strange it might seem at times. What will we do then, sir? Richard looked again at the drawing in his hands, his gaze fixed on the scribbled address in the corner. I'm going to find her, he said, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even himself. But, sir, your meeting with the board and the presentation for the new client. Cancel everything, Richard ordered, already grabbing his coat. This is more important. As he descended in the elevator, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the drawing, the dark images, the desperate words. What was Anna trying to tell him? And why had she run away only to leave behind such a clear clue? The address led him to a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, a maze of narrow streets and crowded houses. Richard parked his luxurious car, feeling completely out of place. The house that matched the address was small and poorly maintained, with peeling paint and a crooked fence. Richard hesitated on the sidewalk, unsure of how to proceed. What if Anna wasn't there, and if she was, what would he say? How would he explain his presence? Before he could decide, the front door creaked open. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and disheveled hair stared at him suspiciously. Who are you? What do you want? Richard swallowed hard. I'm looking for Anna, a small girl, about 10 years old. The woman's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing in suspicion. There's no Anna here. Go away before I call the police. She started to close the door, but Richard, driven by impulse, put his foot in the gap. Please, he pleaded, I just want to help. Anna left a drawing with this address. The mention of the drawing made the woman freeze. For a long moment, she just looked at Richard, as if evaluating him. Then, slowly, she opened the door. Come in, she said in a low voice. But be quick. He'll be back soon. Richard entered, his heart pounding in his chest. The inside of the house was dark and suffocating, smelling of mold and something else, something he couldn't identify but made his stomach turn. The woman led him to a small room at the back of the house, and there, huddled in a corner, was Anna. Their eyes met, and Richard saw in them a mixture of fear, relief, and hope. Anna, he whispered, taking a step towards her. But before he could reach her, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the house. The woman paled. He's back, she whispered, terror evident in her voice. You need to go, now. Richard didn't hesitate. He picked Anna up in his arms and turned to leave, but froze when he saw a figure blocking the door. A tall man with bloodshot eyes and clenched fists. "Who the hell are you?" the man growled. "And what are you doing with my daughter?" The air seemed to leave Richard's lungs. As Anna trembled in his arms, he realized he was about to dive into waters much deeper and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The mystery behind Anna's drawing was about to be revealed, and Richard had the terrible feeling that nothing in his life would be the same after this. The silence that followed the man's declaration was so dense that Richard could hear his own heart beating furiously. Anna clung to him tighter, her small body visibly trembling. "I asked who the hell you are." The man advanced, his voice rising dangerously. Richard took a step back, instinctively protecting Anna. His mind raced, searching for a way out. Years of tough negotiations hadn't prepared him for this moment. "I'm Richard Monroe," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found Anna on the street last night, during the storm. She was alone, wet and cold." The man narrowed his eyes, his gaze shifting between Richard and Anna. "And you thought you could just take her? She's my daughter." The woman, whom Richard presumed to be Anna's mother, timidly intervened. "Carlos, please." He was just trying to help. "Shut up," Carlos shouted, making everyone in the room flinch. Richard felt Anna tremble even more in his arms. He needed to get the girl out of there. But how? Then an idea struck him. "Mr. Carlos," Richard began, his voice taking on the calm, persuasive tone he used in tough negotiations. "I understand your concern. It was indeed reckless of me not to contact the authorities immediately. But now that I know Anna has a family, we can resolve this civilly." Carlos seemed to hesitate, the mention of authorities clearly making him nervous. Richard saw his chance. "How about we discuss this in the living room? I'm sure we can come to an understanding." Slowly, the group moved to the cramped living room. Richard gently placed Anna on the sofa, positioning himself protectively beside her. He noticed that the girl immediately grabbed a pencil and a piece of paper from the coffee table and began scribbling frantically. "So," Carlos said, sitting in a worn armchair, "you're rich, aren't you? That suit of yours must cost more than I make in a month." Richard nodded cautiously, realizing where the conversation was headed. "I have a comfortable financial situation, yes." "Well, maybe we can come to an agreement then," Carlos smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "After all, taking care of a child is expensive, isn't it?" The insinuation was clear. Richard felt a wave of disgust, but kept his face neutral. He needed to buy time, think of a way to get Anna out of there without making the situation worse. It was then that he noticed what Anna was drawing. His heart nearly stopped. The new drawing showed the same house, but with disturbing details. A dark figure, clearly representing Carlos, looming over a small Anna. There were dark marks that looked like bruises, a belt in the male figure's hands, and in the corner, almost hidden, what looked like a phone with the emergency number partially dialed. Richard swallowed hard, the reality of the situation hitting him with full force. This wasn't just a case of neglect, it was abuse, pure and simple. "Mr. Carlos," Richard said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "before we discuss any agreement, I'd like to understand Anna's situation better. For example, why was she alone on the street last night?" Carlos frowned, his expression hardening. "That's none of your business. The girl is rebellious. Sometimes she runs away. Kids, you know how they are." Anna's mother, who had been standing quietly in the corner, let out a small sob. Richard looked at her, noticing for the first time the poorly hidden bruises on her arms. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he couldn't just walk away and leave Anna there. "Anna," he said softly, turning to the girl, "would you like to show me your drawing?" Anna's eyes widened with fear, but slowly she extended the paper to Richard. Carlos stood up abruptly. "Enough of this nonsense. You're leaving now, or I'll call the police." Richard stood as well, the drawing firm in his hand. "Are you sure you want to involve the police, Mr. Carlos? Because I have a feeling there's much more to this story than we're seeing." The two men stared at each other, the tension reaching a breaking point. Anna shrank back on the sofa, her eyes darting between them. It was at that moment that the doorbell rang, making everyone freeze. The voice that came from the other side of the door made Richard's blood run cold. "Police! Open the door!" The chaos that followed was instant. Carlos cursed, Anna's mother screamed, and Richard could only think of one thing: protecting Anna at all costs. The drawing in his hand seemed to burn, a silent testimony to the horrors that little girl had faced, and Richard knew, with a certainty that scared him, that his life had changed forever. Dr. Carla Mendez's office exuded an aura of calm and professionalism. Soft-toned walls, comfortable furniture, and a discreet collection of therapeutic toys created a welcoming environment. Richard fidgeted in his chair, his eyes constantly returning to Anna, who sat quietly on the rug, immersed in a new drawing. Dr. Mendez, a woman in her 50s with keen eyes and a gentle expression, observed the scene attentively. She had agreed to see them urgently after Richard had briefly explained the situation over the phone. "Mr. Monroe," the psychologist began, her voice calm but firm, "why don't you tell me exactly what happened in the last 24 hours? Richard took a deep breath and began to recount the events. The encounter in the rain, the night at the apartment, Anna's disappearance, the confrontation at her house, and finally, the police intervention. As he spoke, he watched Dr. Mendez's subtle reactions, noting how she occasionally made notes or glanced attentively at Anna. "And the drawings?" Dr. Mendez asked when Richard finished his account. "Did you bring them?" Richard nodded, carefully removing the papers from his briefcase. He handed them to the psychologist, watching as she examined them with an increasingly grave expression. "These drawings are revealing," she said finally, her gaze turning to Anna. "Anna, dear, can you come here for a moment?" The girl lifted her eyes from her new drawing, hesitant. Slowly, she approached, clutching the paper tightly in her hands. "Anna, can you show me what you're drawing now?" Dr. Mendez asked gently. Anna looked at Richard as if seeking permission. He nodded encouragingly. With slow movements, the girl handed the drawing to the psychologist. Dr. Mendez studied the new drawing for a long moment, her expression becoming even more serious. "Mr. Monroe, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Richard felt a knot form in his stomach. He followed Dr. Mendez to a corner of the office, away from Anna's ears. "These drawings," the psychologist began in a low voice, "indicate severe trauma. The dark figures, the recurring symbols of violence, the use of dark colors, everything points to a prolonged history of abuse." Richard felt his heart tighten. He had suspected this, but hearing the confirmation from a professional made everything terribly real. "The new drawing," Dr. Mendez continued, "shows something interesting. Look here." She pointed to a figure in the corner of the paper. "This is you, Mr. Monroe. Anna has depicted you as a protective, almost heroic figure. This suggests that, in a very short time, you have become a symbol of safety for her." Richard looked at Anna, who was now timidly exploring the toy box in the corner of the room. He felt a wave of emotion he couldn't name. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice betraying his concern. Dr. Mendez sighed. "The situation is delicate. Legally, Anna should be handed over to social services. But given the trauma she has suffered and the trust she seems to have developed in you, an abrupt separation could be harmful." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Mr. Monroe, I'm aware that this is a lot to ask, but would you be willing to become a temporary guardian for Anna while we investigate her situation further?" Richard felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. His life had already been turned upside down in the last 24 hours. Taking on the guardianship of a traumatized child was something he had never considered. And yet, he looked again at Anna. The girl had found a small teddy bear and was hugging it tightly, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. At that moment, Richard knew his answer. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his own voice. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep Anna safe." Dr. Mendez nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. "Great. I'll get in touch with some colleagues in social services. In the meantime, I suggest you take Anna home and try to establish a routine. She will need stability in the coming days." When Richard approached Anna to tell her they were going home, the girl looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "It's okay, Anna," he said softly. "You're safe now." As they left the office, Richard couldn't help but think about the road ahead. He knew it would be difficult, that there would be legal, emotional, and practical obstacles to overcome. But looking at Anna's small hand in his, he felt a determination he had never experienced before. The mystery behind Anna's drawings was far from solved, but Richard was committed to uncovering every detail, no matter the cost. He would seek justice for this little girl who, in such a short time, had become so important in his life. Dr. Mendes's therapy room seemed different today. The curtains were partially closed, creating a more cozy and protected atmosphere. In the center, a low table was covered with papers, colored pencils, and a variety of dolls. Anna was sitting on the floor, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the soft carpet. Richard watched the scene from the sofa, his body tense with anticipation. In the 2 weeks since he had taken temporary guardianship of Anna, he had witnessed moments of progress, shy smiles, whispered words, but also nights tormented by nightmares and days of impenetrable silence. Dr. Mendes entered quietly, closing the door behind her. "Hello, Anna," she said softly. "How are you feeling today?" Anna briefly raised her eyes, shrugging in response. The psychologist didn't seem discouraged by this. "I brought something special today," Dr. Mendes continued, placing a miniature sandbox on the table. "This is called a therapeutic sandbox. You can use the sand and these little toys to create any scene you want." Anna's eyes widened with interest. Slowly, she approached the table, her hesitant fingers touching the soft sand. "Anna," Dr. Mendes spoke gently, "you can use the sandbox to show us what a day in your old house was like." Richard felt his heart tighten. He knew this moment would come, the moment when Anna would have to confront her painful memories. He wanted to protect her, but he knew this was a necessary step for her healing. Anna began to move the sand, picking up small figures and positioning them carefully. Richard and Dr. Mendes watched in silence, exchanging worried glances as the scene unfolded. The first figure Anna placed was a large man, positioned dominantly in the center of the box. Next, a smaller female figure was placed in a corner, almost hidden. Finally, Anna picked up a child figure and partially buried it in the sand, leaving only the head visible. "Anna, Doctor," Mendes asked softly, "can you tell us who these people are?" The girl hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing to the central figure. "Mommy," indicating the figure in the corner. "And me," her voice almost inaudible as she pointed to the semi-buried figure. Richard felt a wave of nausea at the symbolism. The dominant figure of the father, the marginalized mother, and Anna buried, suffocated, trying to disappear. Dr. Mendes kept her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Anna, can you show us what happened on a bad day?" Anna's hands visibly trembled as she moved the figures. The grandfather was positioned over the child figure, a small object resembling a belt in his hand. The mother figure was turned away, facing the corner of the sandbox. Richard closed his eyes, struggling to hold back tears. The reality of the abuse Anna had endured was unbearable. "Anna," Dr. Mendes's voice was gentle but firm, "you are very brave for showing us this. Can you tell us how you felt during these moments?" For a long moment, Anna was silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, she began to speak, her voice small but clear. "I was scared, very scared. Daddy would get angry. He said it was my fault, that I was bad. Mommy, she just cried. I wanted to disappear." Richard couldn't suppress a muffled sob. Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "It's okay, Anna," Dr. Mendes assured. "You are safe now. No one will hurt you here." Anna nodded slowly, then picked up another figure, a man in a suit. Carefully, she placed him between the figure representing her and the figure of the father. "This is you," she said, looking at Richard. "God, you saved me." Richard's heart felt like it was going to burst. He wanted to hug Anna, to protect her from all the world's pain, but he knew he needed to respect her space and her process. Dr. Mendes smiled gently. "Anna, You did an amazing job today. You must be tired. How about we take a break and you go play for a while I talk with Mr. Monroe? Anna agreed, moving to the corner of the room where there were some toys. Richard and Dr. Mendez moved away to talk in low voices. This was a significant breakthrough, the psychologist said. Anna is starting to process her trauma, but the road ahead is still long. Richard nodded, his mind spinning with everything he had witnessed. What can we do? Continue being a safe harbor for her, maintain a routine, offer unconditional support, and Mr. Monroe, prepare yourself. As Anna feels safer, more details may come to light. It will be difficult, but crucial for her healing. As he watched Anna play quietly in the corner, Richard made a silent promise. He would be there for her, no matter what lay ahead. The journey would be difficult, but he was determined to help Anna find the healing and happiness she deserved. Richard found himself in his home office, the light from his laptop illuminating his tired face in the dimness of the night. It had been days since he had plunged into this investigation, seeking any information that could help understand Anna's past. The girl slept in the next room, finally at peace after another night of nightmares. On the screen, a series of official documents, newspaper clippings, and police reports formed a disturbing mosaic of Anna's previous life. Richard rubbed his eyes, trying to process everything he had discovered. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Marcia, the social worker assigned to Anna's case. "Any progress?" she asked, entering quietly. Richard nodded gravely. "More than I'd like," he replied, indicating the chair in front of him. Marcia sat down, her face reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "What did you find out?" Richard took a deep breath before beginning. "Anna's full name is Anna Louise Ferreira. She was born 10 years ago in a small town in the interior. Her mother, Maria Ferreira, was very young when she had her only 17. The father, Carlos Ferreira, was 25 at the time." He paused, clicking on some files on his computer. There are records of several police calls for domestic disturbances at their address over the years. Neighbors reported frequent screams, sounds of things breaking, but nothing was ever pursued. Marcia nodded somberly. "Unfortunately, that's a common pattern in domestic abuse cases," Richard continued, his voice tense. "I found school records for Anna. In the early years, she was described as a bright, creative child. But from age 7, there are notes about behavioral changes. She became withdrawn, has had trouble concentrating. There were suspicions of abuse, but—" "Let me guess," Marcia interrupted. "Nothing was done." Richard nodded sadly. "The school made some reports, but without concrete evidence and with the parents denying everything, the case never advanced." He opened another file, clearly a medical record. There are also several visits to the emergency room over the years. Broken arm, bruises, cuts, always with vague explanations about domestic accidents. Marcia closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to push away the mental image of Anna's suffering. "And the mother? Is there any information about her?" Richard hesitated. "That's the most complicated part. Maria seems to have been both a victim and an accomplice in a way. There are records of her also seeking medical attention for injuries, but she always defended her husband. In one report, a social worker suspected that she might suffer from battered woman syndrome. That would explain why she couldn't protect Anna," Marcia commented, her voice laden with sorrow. Richard nodded, then opened one more file. "But there's more. 3 months ago, Maria was admitted to the hospital with severe injuries. She didn't survive." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with horror and sadness. "Was that when Anna ran away?" Marcia asked softly. "Apparently," Richard confirmed. "There's a missing person report about her, filed by a neighbor, not the father. But it was quickly shelved, with little investigation." Marcia shook her head in indignation. The system failed her at every level. Richard leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of all these revelations. "What intrigues me is how Anna survived on the streets for so long, and how she developed such impressive artistic skills." At that moment, a small noise caught both their attention. Anna was standing in the doorway of the office, her big, frightened eyes fixed on them. "Anna," Richard said softly, standing up. "How long have you been there?" The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly approached the desk, her eyes scanning the scattered documents, the images on the computer screen. "You're talking about me," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Richard knelt beside her, getting on eye level. "Yes, Anna. We're trying to understand what happened to you so we can help you better." Anna was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she began to speak. "After Mommy, after she was gone, I couldn't stay there anymore. Daddy got worse. So I ran away. On the streets, I met others like me, kids who ran away from bad things. We helped each other." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "There was an old man, a street artist. He gave us paper and pencils sometimes. He said drawing helped to take the bad things out of us." Richard felt his heart tighten. He wanted to hug Anna, to protect her from all the world's pain, but he knew he needed to let her continue. "Anna," Marcia intervened gently, "you were very brave to tell us this. You know you're safe now, don't you?" Anna looked at Richard, then back at Marcia. Slowly, she nodded. "No one will hurt you again," Richard promised, his voice filled with emotion. "We will take care of you." Anna looked into his eyes, as if searching for the truth in his words. Then, to Richard's surprise and joy, she took a small step forward and hugged him. As he held the girl in his arms, Richard exchanged a meaningful look with Marcia. The road ahead would still be long and difficult, but now they had hope. With each revelation, with each piece of Anna's past that came to light, they were one step closer to helping her heal her wounds and build a better future. The night advanced outside, but inside that office, a new light of hope began to shine. The office of Dr. Henry Vasquez, one of New York's most respected family law attorneys, exuded an aura of power and tradition. Richard sat uncomfortably in the leather chair, aware that the decision he would make today could change not only his life, but also Anna's future. "Mr. Monroe," Dr. Vasquez began, adjusting his glasses, "I understand that you want to help this girl, but you need to understand the legal implications of your actions." Richard nodded, tense. "I know the situation is complicated, Doctor, but after everything Anna has been through, I can't just hand her over to the system." The lawyer sighed, leafing through the documents in front of him. "The fact is, technically, you have no legal right over Anna. In the eyes of the law, you could be accused of kidnapping." The words hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. But she was alone on the street. Her father is abusive." "I understand," Dr. Vasquez replied, his voice softer. "But without concrete evidence and a court order, we can't just remove a child from her family." Richard leaned forward, his voice filled with emotion. "And the drawings, the psychologist's reports? The marks on her body?" "Circumstantial evidence," the lawyer replied. "Strong but not conclusive. And there's the fact that you kept Anna for weeks without notifying the authorities. That doesn't work in your favor." Richard ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "So what do you suggest I do? Hand her back to that monster?" "Doctor." Vasquez leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of seriousness. "What I suggest is that we do this by the book. We'll file for temporary custody, citing suspicion of abuse. This will give us time to build a solid case. And in the meantime, where does Anna stay?" "Ideally in a state shelter." "No," Richard interrupted, standing abruptly. "She's already been through too much trauma. I won't put her in a strange place with people she doesn't know." The lawyer observed him for a moment, then slowly nodded. "There is another option, but it's risky. We can request that you be named Anna's temporary guardian during the investigation. Given your status and resources, there's a chance the judge will agree." Richard felt a flicker of hope. "And what are the risks?" "If it's discovered that you kept Anna without notifying the authorities, it could severely damage your chances. Additionally, Anna's father could contest, claiming that you're using your influence and money to steal his daughter." Richard sat down again, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. "And if I just continue as we are, keep her with me, protected?" The look Dr. Vasquez gave him was a mixture of understanding and warning. "That would be illegal, Mr. Monroe. You'd be putting yourself at risk of criminal prosecution." and in the end, you could end up harming Anna more. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with implications. Richard closed his eyes, visualizing Anna, her shy smile when she felt safe, her terrified look after a nightmare. How could he fail her now? "Gus, there's one more thing to consider," the lawyer said softly. "If we follow the legal path, there's a real chance we could not only protect Anna, but also help other children in similar situations. Your case could set a precedent." Richard opened his eyes, meeting Dr. Vasquez's firm gaze. "What do we need to do?" The lawyer nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "First, we need to notify the authorities immediately. I'll prepare an emergency temporary custody request. In the meantime, you need to prepare for intense scrutiny. Your life, your past, everything will be examined." Richard swallowed hard, but nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good. And, Mr. Monroe," the lawyer added, his tone gentler, "what you're doing for this girl is admirable. It won't be easy, but I'm here to help." As he left the office, Richard felt like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, full of legal and emotional obstacles. But thinking of Anna, of her courage in the face of so much suffering, he knew he had no choice. He would fight for her, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, doing the right thing meant facing the system, defying the odds, and risking everything for someone who couldn't defend themselves. With renewed determination, Richard picked up his phone. It was time to inform Marcia, the social worker, and officially begin the battle for Anna's custody. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he wouldn't give up without a fight. The conference room in Richard's penthouse was tense with anticipation. Around the large polished wooden table sat the people who had become crucial in Anna's life in recent weeks. Richard, Dr. Carla Mendez, social worker Marcia, Dr. Henry Vasquez, and, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Helen, Richard's housekeeper, who had become a maternal figure for Anna. Richard looked at each of them before speaking. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss Anna's future and how we can best protect her." Dr. Vasquez spoke first. "I filed the temporary custody request yesterday. Given the urgency of the situation, we expect a response from the judge in the next few days." "And if the request is denied?" Marcia asked, her tone worried. "Then we fight," Richard replied firmly. "And we appeal. We look for other legal options. I won't give up on Anna." Dr. Mendez intervened. "From a psychological standpoint, stability is crucial for Anna right now. Any abrupt change could be extremely detrimental to her progress." "I agree," said Marcia, "but we also need to consider the legal aspect. If we're caught circumventing the system, we could lose any chance of helping Anna long-term." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a delicate balance, I know, but I can't bear the thought of Anna going back to that abusive situation or being thrown into a system that has already failed her." Mrs. Helen, who had been silent until then, spoke softly. "If I may, I've been observing Anna daily. The transformation in her is remarkable. She's starting to trust, to open up. It would be cruel to uproot her from this environment now." Everyone was silent for a moment, absorbing the housekeeper's words. "So what's the plan?" Dr. Vasquez asked, looking directly at Richard. Richard took a deep breath before responding. "We proceed with a temporary custody request. In the meantime, we need to build a solid case. Dr. Mendez, I need a detailed report on Anna's psychological state and the progress she's made." The psychologist nodded. "I'm already working on it. I can also provide an analysis of Anna's drawings as additional evidence of the abuse she suffered." "Excellent," Richard continued. "Marcia, we need your help navigating the social services system. Any record, report, or previous complaint about Anna's family can strengthen our case." "Understood," Marcia replied. "I'll review all the files and talk to my contacts." "There may be information that didn't make it into the official records." Richard then turned to Dr. Vasquez. "Doctor, we need to be prepared for all legal possibilities. If Anna's father contests, if the judge denies our request, what are our options?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. "We can appeal, of course. We can also consider a civil action against the father for negligence and abuse. That could force a deeper investigation. And what about Anna's mother? Mrs. Helen asked softly. She passed away, right? Doesn't that affect the legal situation somehow? Dr. Vasquez nodded gravely. Yes, it does. With the mother deceased, the father has full custody. But it also means that if we prove he's unfit, Anna would fall under state custody. That's where our petition for Richard to become the guardian comes into play. Richard absorbed all the information, his mind working quickly. All right, so here's the plan. We gather all possible evidence, psychological reports, medical records, testimonies. Simultaneously, we prepare for a legal battle. Whatever the initial outcome of the custody request. He paused, looking at each person in the room. But most importantly, we need to ensure that Anna feels safe and loved throughout this process. She's already been through too much trauma. We can't let this legal fight affect her more than necessary. Everyone nodded in agreement. Mrs. Helen, Richard continued, you've been incredible with Anna. Please continue to be that constant and comforting presence for her. The housekeeper smiled, her eyes shining with determination. You can count on me, Mr. Monroe. That girl has won my heart. Richard felt a wave of gratitude for all these people willing to fight for Anna. Thank you all. I know it won't be easy, but together, I believe we can give Anna the future she deserves. As the meeting ended and everyone began to leave, Marcia held Richard back for a moment. You know this could become a public battle, right? Your life, your motives, everything will be questioned. Richard nodded, his gaze determined. I know, and I'm prepared for it. Anna is worth any sacrifice. As he watched the others leave, Richard found himself alone in the conference room. He walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Somewhere out there was Anna's father, perhaps already planning his own offensive. But here, in this room, an alliance had been formed, a force united by the desire to protect an innocent child. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time since he found Anna that rainy night, Richard felt true hope. With this team by his side, and the strength he saw growing in Anna every day, he knew they had a real chance of winning. Now, it was time to return to Anna and continue being the safe harbor she so desperately needed. The courthouse was an imposing building, its marble columns seeming to judge everyone who entered. Richard adjusted his tie nervously as he climbed the steps, Anna holding his hand firmly. The girl was unusually silent, her large, dark eyes absorbing everything around her. Inside, the group gathered Dr. Mendez, Marcia, Dr. Vasquez, and, to Richard's surprise, Mrs. Helen, who had insisted on coming to provide moral support. The lawyer guided them through the busy corridors to a small conference room. Judge Rodriguez will see us in his chambers in 15 minutes, Dr. Vasquez informed, checking his watch. He reviewed our temporary custody request and wants to ask a few questions before making a decision. Richard nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. He knelt in front of Anna, getting on eye level with her. Anna, remember what we talked about. The judge will ask some questions, but I'll be there with you the whole time. You just need to tell the truth, okay? Anna nodded, squeezing Richard's hand tighter. Her silence spoke volumes about her nervousness. The minutes passed tensely until they were called. Judge Rodriguez's chambers were smaller than Richard had expected, but no less intimidating. Judge Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with penetrating eyes, watched them from behind his desk. Mr. Monroe, the judge began, his voice grave, filling the room. I'm aware of the unusual nature of this case. Before making any decision, I need to fully understand the situation. For almost an hour, the judge listened attentively as Richard asked Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Mendez presented the case. The psychological reports, Anna's drawings, the partial medical records they had managed to obtain, everything was meticulously examined. Finally, the judge turned to Anna. His voice softened considerably. Anna, can you tell me why you don't want to go back to your father's house? The silence that followed was deafening. Anna looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. Then, with a voice so low that everyone had to lean in to hear, she began to speak. He hurts. Not just me. He hurt Mommy too. And when she was gone, Anna swallowed hard, tears shining in her eyes. It got worse. The judge listened attentively, his face a mask of professionalism, but Richard could see the compassion in his eyes. "I understand that this is difficult, Anna," the judge said gently, "but I need to know, do you feel safe with Mr. Monroe?" Anna looked at Richard, a small smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer. "He protects me. He makes me feel at home." The judge nodded, then leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "This is a complex situation. Legally, Anna's father has parental rights. However, given the evidence presented and Anna's own testimony, I cannot in good conscience ignore the allegations of abuse." Richard felt his heart race. This was it, the moment of truth. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am granting temporary custody of Anna Louise Ferreira to Mr. Richard Monroe for an initial period of 30 days. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Anna squeezed Richard's hand, a genuine smile lighting up her face. But the judge wasn't finished. "However, this comes with conditions. A thorough investigation will be conducted into the allegations of abuse. Anna's father will be notified and will have the right to contest this decision. Additionally, supervised visits will be scheduled to assess the family dynamics." Richard felt a knot in his stomach at the thought of Anna having to face her father again, but he knew it was necessary for the legal process. "Mr. Monroe," the judge addressed him directly, "I expect full cooperation from you. Any sign of impropriety or attempt to unduly influence this case will result in the immediate revocation of custody." "I understand, Your Honor," Richard replied solemnly. "I will do what is best for Anna." As they left the judge's chambers, the relief was palpable, but Richard knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. Marcia was the first to speak when they returned to the conference room. "This is a victory, but we can't let our guard down. Anna's father will certainly fight this." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "Yeah, we need to be prepared for an intense legal battle. Richard's background will be scrutinized, as well as his motives." "And Anna?" Mrs. Helen asked, concern evident in her voice. "How will we protect her through all this?" Dr. Mendez intervened. "We'll continue with the therapy sessions. It's crucial to maintain a stable and safe environment for Anna, especially now that she'll have to face her father again." Richard looked at Anna, who seemed exhausted but relieved. He knelt beside her again. "It's okay, Anna. We're going home now. You're safe." As they left the courthouse, Richard knew that the days ahead would be challenging. The reality of the situation was setting in: a legal battle, public scrutiny, and the constant challenge of protecting Anna while navigating this complex process. But as he felt Anna's small hand in his, Richard reaffirmed his determination. No matter what lay ahead, he was committed to giving Anna the safe and happy future she deserved. The journey was far from over, but today, at least, they had taken a crucial step in the right direction. Night fell over New York, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars through the windows of Richard's apartment. Anna had just gone to bed, finally sleeping peacefully after a particularly intense therapy session. Richard was in his office, reviewing documents with Dr. Vasquez over a video call when the doorbell rang. Frowning, Richard looked at the clock. Who could it be at this hour? "Should I continue, Mr. Monroe?" asked Dr. Vasquez, noticing Richard's distraction. "Just a moment, doctor. Someone's at the door." Richard got up, a feeling of unease growing in his chest. As he approached the door, he heard Mrs. Helen's voice, tense and worried. "Sir, please, you can't just barge in like this." Richard's heart froze. He quickened his pace, arriving in the living room just in time to see the door swing open violently. There, standing in the entrance, was Carlos Ferreira, Anna's father. His eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted in a mask of rage and alcohol. "Oh, where's my daughter?" Carlos growled, stepping inside the apartment. Richard positioned himself between Carlos and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "Mr. Ferreira, you shouldn't be here. There's a court order." "To hell with your court order," Carlos shouted, his voice echoing through the apartment. "You stole my daughter, you rich bastard." Richard felt his own temper flare, but forced himself to stay calm. No one stole anything. Anna is under my temporary custody by court decision. If you have objections, you should speak with your lawyer. Carlos let out a bitter laugh. Lawyer? You think I have money for lawyers like you? No, I came to get what's mine. He tried to push past Richard, who firmly blocked his way. The two men stared at each other, the tension palpable in the air. Get out of my way, Carlos growled, his breath reeking of alcohol. No, Richard replied, his voice firm. You're not going near Anna. It was then that Carlos swung, throwing a clumsy punch at Richard. Years of boxing practice as a hobby kicked in, and Richard easily dodged, grabbing Carlos's arm and pinning him. Mr. Ferreira, please, don't make things worse for yourself, Richard said, struggling to keep Carlos under control. Mrs. Helen, who had stepped back during the confrontation, reappeared. Security is on the way, Mr. Monroe. And I called the police. Carlos struggled more fiercely upon hearing this. You can't do this. She's my daughter. It was at that moment that a small voice cut through the chaos. Daddy! Everyone froze. Anna was standing in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Carlos stopped struggling, his eyes fixed on Anna. Anna, sweetheart, come here. Daddy came to get you. Anna took a step back, visibly trembling. No, she whispered. I don't want to go. Carlos's expression shifted from rage to something more dangerous, a forced calm that barely concealed his fury. Anna, don't be stubborn. Come here now. Richard cautiously released Carlos, positioning himself between him and Anna. Anna, it's okay. You don't have to go anywhere. Carlos looked from Richard to Anna, then back to Richard. His voice was low and threatening when he spoke again. You don't understand, do you? She's mine, my blood. You can have all the money in the world, but you'll never be her father. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Richard was about to respond when Anna spoke again, her voice small but firm. You're wrong. All eyes turned to her. Anna had taken a step forward, her eyes fixed on her father. Richard isn't my father, she continued, but he protects me. He doesn't yell at me, he doesn't hurt me. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. He makes me feel safe. Carlos stood agape, shocked by his daughter's words. For a moment, it seemed he would lunge again, but the sound of sirens in the distance made him hesitate. This isn't over, he growled, backing towards the door. You'll all regret this, every one of you. With one last furious glance, he left, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard immediately turned to Anna, kneeling to her level. Anna, are you okay? I'm so sorry you had to see that. To his surprise, Anna hugged him tightly. I'm okay, she murmured against his shoulder. You protected me. Richard hugged her back, feeling a mix of relief and concern. The confrontation was over, but he knew the repercussions were just beginning. Mrs. Helen approached, placing a comforting hand on Anna's shoulder. Come on, dear. I'll make you some hot chocolate. As Anna followed Mrs. Helen to the kitchen, Richard found himself face to face with two police officers who had just arrived. Mr. Monroe, one of them asked. We received a call about a home invasion. Richard nodded, exhausted. Yes, officers, please, come in. We have a lot to discuss. In the hours that followed, Richard gave his statement, ensured Anna was safe and comfortable, and made numerous phone calls to Dr. Vasquez or to Marcia, to Dr. Mendez. The incident tonight changed everything. The battle for Anna's custody had just become much more intense and dangerous. As the night wore on, Richard looked out the window, watching the city lights. Anna's father was out there, furious and determined. But inside, Anna was safe, and Richard swore to himself that he would do everything in his power to ensure she remained that way. The road ahead would be difficult, but after tonight's confrontation, Richard was more determined than ever. He would fight for Anna no matter the cost, because in this short time, she had become more than just a child he was trying to help. She had become family. The morning sun bathed Richard's apartment in a golden light, illuminating the scene of celebration in the living room. In the center, Anna, with a radiant smile, prepared to blow out the candles on a cake decorated with the words, "Welcome to the family, Anna." Around her, A small but significant group watched with emotion. Richard, Mrs. Helen, Dr. Mendez, Marcia, and Dr. Vasquez. "Make a wish, dear," Mrs. Helen gently encouraged. Anna closed her eyes for a moment before blowing hard, extinguishing all the candles at once. The room erupted in applause and congratulations. As Mrs. Helen began to cut the cake, Richard found himself lost in reflection. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when Anna's father had invaded his apartment. 6 months of exhausting legal battles, emotionally draining therapy sessions, and small but significant victories. The journey had not been easy. Anna's father, Carlos, after his initial disappearance, had resurfaced weeks later with an aggressive lawyer, determined to regain custody. The hearings that followed were brutal, with Carlos trying to paint Richard as a manipulator who had stolen a child from her family. But the truth prevailed. Anna's drawings, analyzed by Dr. Mendez, told an undeniable story. The psychological reports detailed the deep trauma the girl had suffered. And finally, the neighbors found the courage to speak up, reporting nights of screams and the constant fear in Anna's eyes, facing not only the loss of custody but also potential criminal charges. Carlos finally relented, relinquishing his parental rights. "Richard?" Anna's soft voice brought him back to the present. She was standing before him, a plate with a slice of cake in her hands. "This is for you, thank you, Anne, for everything." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He knelt to be at eye level with Anna. "No, Anna, I'm the one who should thank you. You've changed my life in ways I never could have imagined." Anna hugged him tightly, and Richard felt how much she had grown, not just physically, but in confidence and happiness in the past months. As the guests chatted, Richard stepped away for a moment, walking to the large window. New York stretched out before him, a bustling metropolis of life. Somewhere out there were other children like Anna, scared, alone, desperately needing help. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. Perhaps this journey with Anna was just the beginning. "What are you thinking about?" Dr. Mendez's voice sounded beside him. Richard smiled. "I'm thinking of starting a foundation," he said. "Care to help children in abusive situations, to give them the chance we gave Anna." The psychologist nodded in approval. "That would be extraordinary, Richard, and I'm sure Anna would love to be part of it." As if summoned, Anna appeared beside them, slipping her hand into Richard's. He looked at her, marveling at the transformation. The smile that had once been rare now came easily, her eyes bright and free of the shadows of fear that once inhabited them. "What are you talking about?" Anna asked curiously. Richard knelt beside Anna. "Actually, we were talking about how we could help other children who have gone through tough times, like you did. What do you think about starting a foundation together?" Anna's eyes widened with excitement. "Can we do that? Help other kids find families like I found?" Richard's heart filled with pride and love. "Yes, we can. And I'd love to have your help with it." In that moment, looking out at the city with Anna by his side and surrounded by people who had become family, Richard truly understood the transformative power of a single act of compassion. A decision made on a rainy night had not only changed Anna's life but had completely redefined his own. And now, that change had the potential to spread, touching countless other lives. As the celebration continued, Richard hugged Anna, making a silent promise. This was just the beginning. The drawing Anna had made that first night, once a symbol of pain, was now becoming the sketch of a future filled with hope. Not just for her, but for many other children. The future stretched out before them like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with colors of hope and possibilities. And together, Richard and Anna, with their new extended family, were ready to create a masterpiece of compassion and change. Marcia approached, smiling as she saw the embrace between Richard and Anna. "You two seem to be plotting something," she joked. Richard exchanged a conspiratorial look with Anna before responding, "Actually, I think we're going to need your help with a new project." As Richard began to explain the idea of the foundation, Marcia's eyes lit up with interest and approval. Dr. Vasquez and Mrs. Helen soon joined the conversation, each offering ideas and suggestions. Anna watched everything with a mix of excitement and admiration. She gently tugged on Richard's sleeve, making him lean down to hear her whisper, "Can we call the foundation New Beginnings?" Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. "It's a perfect name, Anna. Perfect." That sunny morning, as laughs and animated conversations filled the apartment, a new journey was just beginning. A journey that promised not only to continue the transformation of their own lives, but also to touch and illuminate countless others along the way. The drawing that once revealed a story of pain now became the symbol of a bright future, not just for Anna and Richard, but for all the children that the New Beginnings Foundation would help in the years to come.